Doug signed them this afternoon in a record time. We think it took, what, 2.5 hours or something. I know my back still hurts. It really does from standing. I'm getting a little old for all that, but we have it down to a science. I mean, the Poison Pen staff is truly remarkable. When you leave the store, if you go out the back door and you see all the mail tubs and all the that's all what this is for, and it'll all be used up by the weekend. I know.
It's quite an operation. They have someone taking the book, opening it to the title page, and then I sign it, and then it's slid over here where then, someone puts in the trading cards that you get, and then another person shuts the book, and another person puts it in a box, and it's like a assembly.
It's sort of
line.
like the Ford Motor Company if we were, yeah, I know. Anyway, Lincoln.
How many people did you have helping?
There were 6 of us, I think, this afternoon. Weren't there? 5?
Yeah,
It's
5 or
amazing
6.
how efficient we are from years of practice dealing with all of you. The most books we ever did at one shot was 30,000, which was more books than Barnes & Noble in its entire U.S. operation bought for that author. More books then. I know. I still haven't recovered from that. But
What, an author sells more books than we do?
well, it's Diana.
I know.
I know. Sorry
Diana
about that.
Gabaldon, she's
It's
amazing.
Outlander, right?
And a
So there
wonderful
and
writer.
she has a staggering international audience, which is where so much of that goes.
Doug
Right.
and I signed 6,000 in a day out in a warehouse in Indiana, and we thought that was the record.
Well,
30,000, my God.
that's really a lot. So Doug and Lincoln actually have a very large international customer base, and a lot of the books that they sign today will go off to Spain. Why is it, guys, that you have such a great audience in Spain?
I have no idea, because when I go to our Facebook fan page, it tells us where most of our
Right.
people are, and so number 1 is Phoenix, Arizona. We have, and number 2 I think is New York City, and number 3 is Madrid,
Right.
and then Barcelona's on there too. And I was like, wow, we have a lot of Spanish, and I wonder about how much our money our Spanish publisher is paying us. We seem to have a lot of readers in Spain, and the books aren't doing very well.
So
Well, I kind of like the music, and so does Doug, so that probably helps.
well, there's also that. I often feel that the international audience is buying the autographed copy of the book kind of like a work of art. And they're going to really read it in their own language because it'll be easier for them and, more reasonable. But they just want to own the actual signed book. Now, how many countries are your books? How many translation?
Well, I don't know, but
Do you
I,
have?
I'll tell you an interesting story. I also write nonfiction pieces for the New Yorker magazine. And I was writing a piece that involved me interviewing some people in Bulgaria and Russia. This is before the Ukraine invasion. And I was talking to this woman in Bulgaria, and she said, you're not the Douglas Preston who writes those books? And I said, yes. She said, everyone reads your books. I said, no, wait a minute. Bulgaria? I didn't even know the books were translated into Bulgarian. She said, oh, you're a best-selling author here. And then, and she said, and also in Russia, because Bulgaria and Russia, everyone reads your books in Russia. You're huge best-selling authors in Russia. And, I asked my publisher, well, how much does our Russian publisher pay? Oh, I think they pay $1,000 a year. It's like, how many books do they sell? Well, I think they reported they sold like 500 books. And I said, well, I think maybe they're not reporting the right figures. And they said, none of those foreign publishers report the right figures. But anyway, as far as Bulgaria and Russia goes, I don't know if that's a good thing, but a lot of people read us there.
It's a lot of
One thing
fun.
that interests me is the fact that if I was multilingual, I would try and read any book in the original language, because when Doug and I get our copies of foreign language editions, they're invariably thinner than the original. And I kind of wonder what the translator left out or what they did to the book. You know, I can't read Bulgarian or Chinese or Russian, so I have no idea. We're kind of at the mercy of our foreign publisher, I guess. I guess all authors are.
Well,
And
you're at the mercy of your foreign translator. That's for sure.
Foreign
Yeah.
translators.
Yeah.
And then we also have pirated editions of our books, like the Thai edition and the Hindi edition or whatever. Our publisher never sold Thai rights or Hindi rights, but someone just decided to translate the book and publish it, and really beautiful covers. And I mean, we're happy that people are reading our books in India and
Absolutely true.
Thailand. And
Now, it's really kind of fun because when their orders come in, they tend to come in like just a blitz. And it's really fun for me because I mostly work at home to watch them come in and to watch all the addresses. You know, here's one to South Africa, here's one to Budapest, here's one to Melbourne, Australia, here's one, you know, and I never imagined when I started this little bookstore 35 and a half years ago over on Main Street across from Molly's that we would have this international audience. You know, I mean, I just find it amazing that, you know, you and Outlander and Clive Cussler, when Clive was alive, were all international authors, and we were all their home bookstore. And it's just kind of a fluke. But it really is fascinating to see how that works. But we're here to talk tonight about a new and fabulous book set in northern New Mexico with Nora Kelly and FBI Agent Corrie Swanson. How many of you here are Hillerman readers? Are any of you readers? Okay, so you're going to love this book because it's going to remind you of some of Tony's books, The Ghost Way. What was the first? The Blessing. What was
Blessing Way.
The Blessing Way. But also that very remote North Canyon country in New Mexico, which is something fairly less traveled, and very ancient civilizations that live there and about which we don't know all that much, do we? We're not sure why they left. Was it drought? Was it, you know, so many factors that they've left traces behind, but not necessarily a huge presence.
That's right. This culture in the book that is central to the story is the Gena culture, and it's a very mysterious a group of prehistoric, you know, Native Americans who lived in this canyon complex in this very remote area of New Mexico, and they vanished. And archaeologists found evidence of tremendous violence and what looks like almost like a genocide. You know, they found all these skeletons in the houses, in the kivas, with arrow points in them, and brutally beaten, you know, and burned, some of them. And the current Pueblo Indians today, you know, they have traditions of where they came from, but none of them have traditions of coming from Guyana. They always say, "Oh no, we never lived there. No, those people were not our people." And there's a negative and dark association with Guyana. But the violence is incredible, and archaeologists have never been able to figure out who committed the violence, why, what happened. This all occurred during prehistoric times, probably around 1200, 1300 AD, and there's no written record. And so this really stimulated our interest in what might have happened, to speculate in a not an outrageous way, but to speculate in a more reasonable way of what could have happened, where did the conflict originate, who were these people, who wiped them out, and why. And so the novel really has that as a background, prehistorical background.
Right.
Yeah, it started out reasonable anyway. I don't know if I call the ending reasonable, but it's certainly a Preston Child ending. Doug and I at the time were really tossing two ideas around. One was the idea of a cult, because we'd heard about some of the fascinating things after the death of Castaneda and what happened to his followers. And, it was just amazing. and we thought we could maybe try and work some kind of fictional version of a cult. I mean, Heaven's Gate, this and that. There's so many fascinating ways to work with such an iconic idea. And Doug, had you written a piece for the New Yorker about the hyena, or is that my imagination?
No, I hadn't written a piece for the New Yorker about it, but I was familiar with it because I was very good friends with an old rancher lady who had a ranch in this canyon, and she'd been approached by archaeologists, and she was working with them to look at some of these ruins and to try to figure out what had happened. So I was and I'd gone around with these archaeologists, and they told me all about the theories and so forth. So that was where my interest came from.
So we decided, there's a hyena, such a fascinating, true story. This violent end to these people that nobody wanted to admit any parentage or any ancestry to. And as Doug said, there are reasons, for not phrenological reasons that they are probably not related. And we thought, why not combine the idea of cults, which seem to ferment in the Southwest? I don't know why, but and the hyena, in our own terms, and we had such fun with Thunderhead, that book we wrote long ago, that we really thought it would be great to return to it with our two strong female heroines, Nora and Corey.
Interesting something. Thunderhead has always been one of our very best-selling Preston and Child novels. It still exists in paperback, and I would love to see a new edition of it, possibly spruced up some. But it's a wonderful book. And one of the eternal questions is what happened to those Indian cultures that I called them Anasazi, but I think that terminology now may not even apply. And I remember visiting one of the canyon civilizations up there, and they pointed out that one of the issues may have been their diet, because they may have actually ended up starving to death, because part of it was that when they ground their whatever they were grinding to make any kind of bread or whatever, they got dust from the stones, and it wore out their teeth. And so, they weren't able, you've probably run into that, right? That maybe they just couldn't really eat.
Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of theories, but
Yeah.
I just read that genetic evidence has connected. People wonder, what happened to Chaco Canyon, for
Right.
example? Where did they go? And it turns out that the genetic research has just uncovered that the people of Picaris Pueblo in northern New Mexico are descendant from Chaco Canyon, people in Chaco Canyon. They found DNA in Chaco Canyon that connected them with the Picaris,
Sure.
which is really fascinating. So they didn't die out. They just moved away. And why did they move away? And of course, there was huge violence at the time that Chaco collapsed. There was a cannibalism and tremendous violence. So
Wait, you mean there was violence at Chaco Canyon, that huge complex, similar to the hyena violence?
well, there was, yes, there was, but not similar to the Guyena violence. The Guyena violence looked like it was from the outside, whereas in Chaco Canyon it looked like the violence was a civil war or social unrest, a different kind of violence.
And, climate change may have had a lot to do with it. I've spent some time in Peru, 3 different trips to Peru, and all along the the Pacific coast of South America, there were periodic droughts. And so civilizations kind of rose and fall. There were sacrifices made, to try to appease the drought gods. But there were periodic droughts that were, catastrophic for some of those civilizations. And so that's another question, was there a catastrophic drought in around 1500 or something?
Yeah, that's
that
right.
really made life untenable for these
Right.
people?
It's entirely possible. So a lot of what we're talking about is in this novel, is the background, which is all very accurate. There's nothing, we didn't make up anything. I mean, for example, we talk about the lighthouses. The Anasazi, that word is no longer in favor. It's the ancestral Pueblo people made lighthouses all over the Four Corners area on pinnacles where they could light a fire and communicate with another pinnacle, 30 miles away, where they'd light a fire, and they could literally in one night communicate over 100,000 square miles. And I've seen some of these lighthouses. You can see the remains of them. And it's really interesting to think that in one night, 100,000 square mile area of Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, and Colorado could be in communication with each other. But that also is in the novel. And those lighthouses form a very important part of the novel, which we won't go into because we don't want to spoil it. But so.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning. How did then Corrie and Nora Kelly get into this whole thing? And what we learn is there's a woman who has walked out into the desert under the full sun, basically stripped herself naked, and then laid down and died. Why in the world would that have happened? And then in the process of dealing with that, they find potentially an earlier version of her, an earlier victim.
Right.
So what's going on?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Link, go ahead.
Well, what makes it really interesting was we had to find a reason to get Nora involved in this initially, because we don't want the cases becoming all about the FBI and not about archaeology. So I brought that up to Doug, and he had the idea of putting those prazolite lightning stones in their hands, and we made them green to make them very, very unique. And so each dead woman, the newly dead woman and the one they found that had been dead for quite some time, was clutching one of these stones in their hands, and it was clear they were sacrificing themselves, but why, nobody knew. But it was the prazolite stones that got Nora interested and got them both working on the case.
So that's a really excellent point. They weren't murdered. They were actually self-sacrificing themselves by walking out completely unprepared, no water, no nothing, and just laying down and dying in the desert. It's really pretty terrifying, guys.
Well, I guess we have sick imaginations, but yeah, it was, and these lightning stones are real. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they find them in kivas sometimes. They're usually quartz, and in the darkness, if you bang them together, rub them together, you see these sparks of light, and so they believe. They're not really sure, but they believe that they had some very important ceremonial purpose. But these particular lightning stones are not white quartz, they're green, which is a very rare kind of quartz. And so that's why Nora's brought in, is to try to figure out what was going on.
So it's actually, you set up this series. This is what, book 5 in this series?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you have set it up so that Nora Kelly, an archaeologist, has a working relationship with Corrie Swanson, who is an FBI field agent assigned to Santa Fe, and has worked her way. Because you introduced her, what was the book? Winter Hill? Was that the right title?
It was.
Oh, you mean originally, or
Yeah.
in the series?
She goes back a long way into your work.
Still Life with Crows was the first book
Ah,
that she was in.
okay.
And then we decided to team her up with Nora Kelly, another longtime Pendergast friend in Old Bones, the story about the Donner Party, essentially.
Yeah, but didn't she show up earlier in a book called Winter? Do I have that right?
Yes.
She did, yeah.
Yeah.
White Fire. The
Whitefire. That
right,
was it.
exactly.
Sorry.
So
okay.
Corrie, was a teenager in Still Life with Crows,
Right.
a rebellious teenager. But Pendergast takes her under his wing and helps her go to college, and then she goes to the and she studies forensic, criminology, and
John Jay.
she goes to the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and then she eventually becomes a junior FBI agent, and that's what she is in this novel.
Right, but I mean, you created a whole thing for Nora Kelly in Santa Fe, an
Right.
institute that she gets to work in, and you've got Corrie assigned to a field office there where she's trying to achieve some kind of seniority or whatever it all is, right?
Exactly,
so does that
yeah.
pretty much limit what they're going to be doing to New Mexico?
Well, not really, because sometimes, even the Albuquerque field office, the FBI, is a nationwide organization, and sometimes a case may originate in New Mexico but bring them outside the state.
But the book 4 and this one are definitely New Mexico.
Absolutely New Mexico,
Right,
yeah.
but originally it was Donner's Pass, right?
It
in
was.
California?
That was California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So-
It's interesting you mentioned that, Barbara, because just last week I was talking to Doug, and I telling him that I thought that Nora should take the lead in the next one we write, and we should probably take it somewhere else.
And we were thinking of Arizona. What do you think?
Oh,
We love
yay.
Arizona.
Because it's we don't want to ever fall into a endless loop of Corrie calling out Nora, who has enough on her plate, and we had to find something really interesting to get her excited. So we thought it was time for Nora to be either endangered or to come up with something that Corrie has to be seduced into investigating, to make it very different from the last couple of books.
Right.
But
I'm
that's
sorry.
still to come.
Patrick is saying something to me. No, I don't think so. Is it?
Okay, I'm trying to get the people online to be able to hear Link a little bit better.
Okay. Is it too loud for any of you? We're trying to balance it with the online audience. Are you okay with the volume? Okay. Great. All right. We're fine. Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to lip read Patrick and listen to Lincoln. It's difficult to do. So, the last book, Dead Mountain, didn't really have any supernatural elements in it at all. I mean, it was, I thought, fabulous. I don't know if all of you have read it, but I absolutely loved it. And in the end, without any spoilers, the solution to it is not supernatural, but in point of fact, real. In this book, we do have a supernatural, or at least a potentially supernatural element that comes into it, and certainly in some of the earlier books. So how do you decide how much real and how much potentially not real are going to be elements in the story? Same problem with Pendergast to a great degree.
That's a really good question. Link, do you have an answer for that? Because that's something that I've often wondered myself.
Well, I'll take a stab at it, Doug, and then why don't you answer yourself? In the case of this book, we decided that because of the not to put in any spoilers, but there is a cult aspect to the story as well, and almost any cult believes something that's crazy, and that crazy thing could be either that the cult leader is God or a god, or that they're trying to summon a god, or whatever. And in our book, the story leaned more and more towards a supernatural entity or entities that our version of the Gena believes in. And so Doug and I were faced with a real question. In stories like Relic, we build a platform of concrete and science, so at the very end, people's suspension of disbelief is fully in place when the brain-eating monster comes along. But in this book, we were very, well, again, without giving anything away, I have to be a bit vague, but we were very certain that we wanted to leave the door open for a supernatural explanation. maybe not for the people who came the following day to mop up, but for those involved, um, we didn't pull back. We left the money shot in there, so to speak.
Yeah, that's about right. We found that the mystery, you have a cult, right? And they're all crazy, and they're not good people, and they've got twisted ideas. But underneath all that is some kind of supernatural power, which is not a good power, and which they've somehow connected to. And that's where the story really gets dark. And I think it's one of our darkest stories, and I think the ending is totally crazy. How many of you have actually read the book? Probably not many. Only
And it
one.
is
Okay.
totally crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to vouch for that. But here's the thing I think is so funny. Years ago, back in the 90s, I agreed to teach crime fiction at ASU for 3 years. And I gave it up eventually because there was no parking. But more than that, it made it almost impossible to teach the class and come back here and do the events. And the university did not want to send its students here because there were insurance questions for them if their students attended classes off-site. But one of the books that I chose for those 3 years for their reading list was Tony Hillerman's Thief of Time, which is the book that he won the Edgar for. Now, have any of you read Thief of Time? And if you have, do you remember it? So basically, it was about archaeology in New Mexico, pot hunting and so forth. And in the end, it was really about trying to achieve academic tenure or whatever by a certain amount of falsification and so forth. Well, and so people got killed over this. And the students, uniformly for 3 years, were incredulous that this was a motive for murder. They just could not believe. And it sort of, maybe there's a sort of a trope that goes, when the stakes are that low, the crime is that high. And that was their attitude, was that nobody could possibly want to kill anybody over just like academic advancement or tenure at a university. In this book, it goes to a much higher level. And the people, you guys really are going to have to apologize to the University of New Mexico faculty at some point, because this is really academics unchained. They are behaving so badly.
We
And,
heard from their lawyers.
No kidding. I was really amazed. So once again, you have to decide whether the stakes are so low, if the crimes are that high to do it, because this is, in part, a story that is framed in people desperate for academic advancement.
Although, like you say, when the stakes are that high, in this case, not only intellectual advancement, but also, when you bring in the supernatural, the cult factor,
Right.
then you get a kind of a obsession that overrides everything else, and so that really made it more than simply a academic, although that was certainly a big part of it. But one thing that Doug and I had a lot of fun doing was, there was a point when we weren't sure exactly how far we were going to go in the supernatural direction. Just like reading the teachings of Don Juan, you're not really sure how far you go, supposedly, if you went anywhere at all. But we had a lot of fun teasing the reader with whether or not this was going to end up being, just somebody high on mescaline or peyote or something, or really something from another world. And, because most of the time we give them a scientific answer, but this time we did not want to necessarily.
I like the fact that you juxtaposed the somewhat supernatural or cult thing with actual fracking in the state of New Mexico. I didn't even know they were doing fracking in New Mexico.
Oh my God! All those Badlands are being completely fracked. They were old oil leases and gas
Right.
leases that had fallen into disuse because
Right.
they extracted everything. But then when fracking came in, they realized they could go back down and frack it and get a lot more. And so there's a lot of controversy about fracking too close to Chaco Canyon. But all those Badlands are being fracked now. And I
That's
mean,
awful.
New Mexico is the second largest oil and gas producing state in the country after
Really?
Texas.
More than Wyoming?
More than Wyoming. 30% of New Mexico's budget are oil and gas royalties.
Wow,
So-
I had no idea. If you're a CJ Box reader, you're absolutely convinced that Wyoming is the number two.
No,
so
Wyoming's nothing compared to New Mexico.
wow, well, there's a whole deal. Okay, so what we have are these ancient civilizations in these Badlands contrasted with, modern fracking technology, and there's some real headbutting between Nora and Corey trying to move north in the fracking community who doesn't want them up there. This is a part, I have been up what used to be New Mexico Highway 69, now reestablished as a less controversial number, into the hoodoos, into the New
yeah,
Mexico Badlands. You go from Gallup if you go north, isn't it? Used to
Yeah,
be
that's-
Highway 69.
Well, I think it'd be Highway 550 now. They
Right.
renovated it. It's now a 4-lane road, but it goes right through the Badlands.
Exactly.
It goes through the Hickory Apache
That's right.
Reservation, and it's where George O'Keeffe, went and did her famous paintings of the Black Place.
Mhm.
They were painted in the. And they fracked her. That beautiful area where she painted. That's all been
Ah.
fracked. They're huge fracking tanks there now.
Well, that part of the New Mexico, if you've never been there, the hoodoo thing is amazing. If you've ever seen pictures of Cappadocia and Turkey, and they talk to you about the fairy palace, all the it's the same. It's exactly the same as the New Mexico hoodoos. In fact, the mesas are exact. We were in Cappadocia. I said to Rob, we didn't need to come to Turkey. We could have just gone to New Mexico. Once again, there it is. But seriously, it is
Yeah.
almost identical. And part of it is that there is a whole volcano. What's the word? A caldera, because there's a major caldera right near where you're talking about. From
right.
Cuba, New Mexico, goes kind of up towards Abiquiu and over towards
That's
Santa Fe.
exactly right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of volcanism. There's that huge caldera you're talking
Right.
about, and there are also these volcanic plugs,
Right.
which are the eroded
Shiprock.
throats of volcanoes.
Yeah,
Shiprock
Shiprock
one
is a
of them.
classic volcanic
Exactly.
plug.
Yep.
Right.
Cabazon Peak is another. So
Right. So anyway, this part of New Mexico that Doug and Lincoln are writing about in this book, even I haven't been quite up into that wild canyon country above. So how far is it from Farmington?
it's south of Farmington, pretty much due south of Farmington.
Is it?
Yeah, and west and east. It's a huge area. They're the Bisti Badlands,
Right.
which we all
Which
know
I have
about.
been to. Right.
And Ashislepa Wash, which was just turned into a wilderness. And then there are all these other areas that are just BLM land. And then the Navajo, checkerboard part of the Navajo reservation is there too. So there's like square miles of Navajo land alternating with BLM land. And all that land has been leased for, a lot of it has been leased for oil and gas. So.
Sorry, as I curl my lip. Right. Nora and Corey are faced with two dead women, one much more dead than the other, who are inexplicably, out there unclothed and apparently suicidal in the desert. That's what kicks this all off, right?
Yeah, so they identify who the women are eventually, and they interview their families, and then they find that they all have something in common. They were all students of a professor at the University of New Mexico, a very charismatic professor, handsome, guy.
I never had a professor like that.
Yeah. Well, and
I had lots of professors.
yeah, and he disappeared. No one knows where he went to. Everyone said, oh, maybe he went back to Mexico to live with this shaman or whatever. But it turns out he was gathered around himself a group of mostly women that he's sleeping with, and and they're all under his spell, and and they start realizing that this guy was kind of a cult leader. But what kind of cult was this? These are women who are, getting their PhDs. These are not, uneducated people. They're sophisticated people from, so what's going on here? And that's, I won't
Well,
go
we're
any
not going to tell them.
yeah,
That's
I
the
don't
whole
worry
point of the
about it.
story. Right. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And there's a nifty little trip into Mexico, too, which I really enjoyed. Many people think that New Mexico is a place where you have to have a passport to get in, or maybe the currency isn't the same, or does anyone speak English? There's some. My husband lived for 30 years in Santa Fe before we met, and he decided he would live here with me. But there's some really funny stories about the land of enchantment, right?
That's right. There are some people who say, my family's in Maine, and I'll say, go to New Mexico. I live in New Mexico. Oh, really? Really? Are there border issues? Do you have to, worry
Right.
about visas or, passports? It's like,
You need pesos?
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole bit. I know, it's really fascinating. But it's the one, you guys wrote, how many books was it for Gideon? Was it 3, 4? What was it?
5. I think it
5.
was 5.
Okay, and he was a guy that was from New Mexico.
yeah, we set a lot of our books in New Mexico because that's, an area that I'm familiar with. And we don't like to write about, some of our books are set in Florida, where Link is very knowledgeable about Florida. So we like to set our books in areas that we really know what we're talking about and not just making it up. We do feel that it's really important for a novel to be accurate, even if there's fiction in it. The settings, the science, all has to be accurate.
So I was just, as some of you may know, on a long trip through France and Sicily, and we made a point of picking a ship that went by Stromboli. So do you remember from Pendergast when they go by the Stromboli volcano? Unfortunately, our ship went by in the daytime when there's just like a cloud over the volcano, and you really have to go at night. But I was sort of checking you out for accuracy. And so I have a new location for you. Listen to this, Lincoln. I have a new location, which is called Bonifacio, Corsica. I haven't yet shown Doug and Lincoln the videos, but Bonifacio is an incredible place for a story. So I'm going to steer you in that direction.
Well, we look forward to it. It'll
Yes.
maybe appearing in a novel soon.
That's right. It's amazing. But I will say that they have done a wonderful job, and I think all of the landscapes and all of the books by Lincoln and Child are particularly evocative, whether it's like the New Jersey shore or down in Florida or somewhere in Savannah or Stromboli or New Mexico, whatever. You guys do a wonderful job evoking the landscape, and the story really needs, even Nebraska, if I remember right, the landscape needs to fit or be the springboard for the story. Is that right?
Well, it does. The landscape is always a character in the story.
Doug lived in Florida for several years, and so we set Brimstone there, among other places. I, unfortunately, spent several years growing up in Minnesota, so we set Still Life with Crows in Kansas.
That was
You know,
Kansas.
and the ears of corn waving everywhere. And then after we wrote it, we were told that they grow wheat in Kansas, not corn. But,
Nebraska. Remember, I said Nebraska. Right. That's right. The corn isn't the
and a lot
corn.
of-
The Corn Palace is somewhere in Nebraska, isn't it? Right. Right. There we go.
and a lot of our books set in New York because we both lived there so long. So that is very important to us because you can tell when somebody's either info dumping you stuff they've learned on Wikipedia about a place or things that they actually know about. And it's really important to help get the reader into the story that you can put your own spin on a real place that you've been yourself.
What else would you like to say?
Well, I
Savannah,
think
Savannah is still recovering from
Yeah.
that book.
yeah, both Lincoln and I love Savannah. Actually, we tend to kind of mess with the places we love. you know, I felt so bad about what we did to Savannah. But,
You should be. I mean, Midnight in the Garden, Good and Evil was bad enough, but I was in Savannah last year, and I thought about both of your books. Because have any of you read Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil? If you haven't, you really should. It's a perfectly amazing true crime. It was an enormous bestseller, long time ago. God, it
yeah,
must be
that
20
was
years ago
John
or something.
Barand. Yeah, it was an amazing book.
Yeah, but Savannah is a wonderful smaller city in Georgia. It's set. It's a river city. It's not really a port in the classic sense because the city is about 40 miles from the water, but there's a river that. The first time I was there with my daughters when they were fairly young, and we were standing up on one of the cliffs, because the action, the port part takes place down by the water, but a lot of the buildings and everything are up on the cliff. And I looked downriver, and there was this absolutely fabulous-looking clipper ship sailing towards us with all kinds of young men in the rigging. And I thought, can it be pirates? Can it seriously be pirates? Because there's a whole pirate culture in Savannah. One of the oldest restaurants in the North Americas, in fact, for pirates in the city of Savannah. But it turned out it was the Coast Guard clipper, and this was their training ship. And they had these kids up in the rigging, learning to sail an actual clipper ship.
Wow.
I know it was gorgeous. I could
incredible.
hardly believe it. We were allowed to go on board if we wanted to, and it finally docked and the whole bit.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm glad to know that our next Pendergast book is not set in Savannah, but it's set in New Orleans,
Okay.
which has its own share of vices and
Yes.
History to it. And he's finally going back to his roots.
Okay. That's
Beautiful
right.
one.
That's right. You guys have gone to a lot of trouble to set up Pendergast's family.
Yeah, this novel is entitled Pendergast, and it is his first case.
The
And it
origin
goes
story.
Pendergast, the origin story, and it's
right?
about his first case as an FBI agent in the New Orleans office, and things
First and last.
things definitely go awry. Yeah.
So it'll be with you in 2026, but we're not entirely clear of the date yet. But stay tuned because we will certainly tell you. Right. So what do you think? Should we ask questions from the audience?
Sure, yeah, we love your questions.
All right.
You're up.
All right, yes, sir.
I have a question about movie and streaming rights for your books, not necessarily this particular book is new, obviously. But to my knowledge, Relic is the only one so far that you've had brought to screen?
Yes.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, what about the movie or the streaming rights for the books, the whole Pendergast series? The issue is this. When Paramount Pictures bought Relic, they acquired movie rights to all the characters. So only they can make a movie or a television show. And they, for a long time, they didn't have any interest in doing it. Paramount's been a dysfunctional studio for a long time. I mean, it's no longer the iconic Hollywood studio that it used to be. And so they just weren't interested or couldn't get their act together, and they didn't want to sell it, but they didn't want to turn the rights back over to us, but they didn't want to do anything themselves. But now they've started to work on it. Some kind of streaming series. They're going to start with Cabinet of Curiosities. But
And if they don't happen to hear this interview, they will.
yeah, well, I don't know. I'm so sick and tired of them that I don't give a damn what they hear. I mean,
To answer your question, we wish we had more problems with streaming rights than we do. We've come so close so many times, to Bibles, screenplays, pilots, and then to have rubber stamped by some exec at the last minute is just disgusting, and we can't believe it.
You're not the only authors that have had a problem with Paramount, so
Yeah, Paramount. I mean, everyone knows what I'm saying about Paramount is not a secret. You know, it's been mismanaged by the Redstone family, the infighting in the family, they can't seem to get their act together.
The Redstone Family is a drama that you really ought to look up and read it. I mean, there are thrillers that are not as convoluted and difficult as the entire Redstone family history. And the best thing that happened in many respects is that Simon & Schuster, which was caught up in the whole drama, managed to escape and was bought out by a hedge fund. But, I mean, I've been involved in that for 35 years, and it's just, you couldn't even make it up.
Yeah, it's really disappointing because there's so many creative people at Paramount, all the movie, and they were being hurt by it.
But I mean, it's one of those things like Succession, where Sumner Redstone lived way too long into his 90s, and it really was Succession, wasn't it? I mean, I think
and his
Succession,
daughter was an absolute
Shari
Redstone. Well, I better not say what I think.
No.
But she sued her
Tell me,
father.
Barbara, would you compare it to the Murdoch family or
Yes,
not?
I
in that
would,
sense?
although I think the Murdoch family is somewhat more functional. And also, I think the judge in Nevada who refused to let them fuck it up did a good job. But the Southern District, federal court in the Southern District of New York is not an ally that one would wish to have. At some point soon, I'm going to write to you about the lawsuit that was filed against the Poison Pen in the federal Southern District of New York in federal court. A complete scam. And you'll be happy to know that I am the only defendant that has ever been sued by this outfit in the Southern District of New York, who actually was willing to go to trial and therefore got her case dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can never file it again. But most people are so terrified by the thought of lawsuits, and particularly, may I add, in the Southern District of New York Federal Court, which is like, do you know how they assign judges in this? They have a wooden ball system. They have a wheel in which they have wooden balls, and they assign judges to it based on spinning the wheel. I mean, really? That's what they
like
do.
New York lottery.
It's unbelievable. So, I fully understand why the Redstone drama was particularly difficult. Right, now I'll get sued
Yes.
by everybody who's listening to this, but who cares?
To have your books in streaming, because I watch movies and they're so terrible.
Yeah, we think Pendergast would make a wonderful streaming series, and there are 21 Pendergast books. There's a lot of material there.
Yeah, but you'd have to be really careful that it's done well, because it
Right,
could be
that's
really bad.
important. Well, that's the problem, is it's rolling the dice. You give them your book, and you have no idea. They take control, and you have no control yourself, or they may pretend to listen to you, but they don't. And then they do whatever they want with it, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's terrible. I mean, with Michael Connolly's books, they did a pretty good job with Harry Bosch. The Bosch series. And he's a wonderful writer, and I think they did justice to that character. So it would have to be something like that with Pendergast. Very important that they don't change his character.
Yeah, but all the supernatural stuff could really go awry. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Whether they take it too far or make it ridiculous. So you'd have to be careful. Yes, sir.
I had a question before I give my question on topic. Do you like the show Dark Winds? I think that's really well done.
Yes, Dark Winds. I love the show of Dark Winds. I actually know the director, Chris Eyre, who's a fantastic director and a wonderful human being. And I don't know if you know this, but George R.R. Martin and I and another guy bought the Santa Fe Southern Railroad in Santa Fe that goes from Santa Fe to Lamy. It's a little spur line that goes for 18 miles. And one of the things we do is we rent the railroad out for movie companies. And we rented it out to Dark Winds, and the last episode of season 3 was filmed almost entirely on our railroad. So, and we
It's
got
a wonderful trip. It really is. I've done it, and if you take the night one, they have a astronomer, a person who's expert in all that from University of New Mexico, I think, or maybe Santa Fe College anyway, that takes the trip with you because it's beautiful for the night sky because they're out, you know, in the middle of the desert. But I'm explaining to Doug that the problem that Doug and George need to think about is that people drink so much on that train, when they get off, there should be an Uber waiting for them. So I'm really serious
We should
about
have
that
a
one.
bus waiting for them to take him to the drunk tank.
Right, no. I just said to Doug that the price of the ticket should include a ride at the end of the train back to wherever they are staying in Santa Fe, because there's just an astounding amount of alcohol served on the train. But it's a great train. It really is.
People love the going out on the train, and they, you know, it's very convivial. Every car has its own musician. It turns out that our train is the largest employer of musicians in the state of New Mexico, because we've got like
Really?
we've got 4 or 5 cars. We run 2 trains a day. Each car is a musician, and we pay them really well, so we get the best. And I was amazed when I heard that.
Oh, that's really funny. So for those of you who don't know, Lamy, New Mexico is where the Santa Fe Railroad went. It didn't go to Santa Fe. Everybody thinks that the Santa Fe went to Santa Fe. No, it went to Lamy, and then people had to be transported to Santa Fe. So this is kind of a way of, you know, moving the railroad back in there. And there used to be, what was the name of the saloon?
The legal tender.
The Legal Tender, right. I've been down there to have dinner at the Legal
and
Tender,
that's,
which
and,
is...
and that's reopened now.
Oh, has it?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
very
good.
nice. It's
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you've done the Verde Canyon Railroad here, if any of you done that, because that's really fabulous, or you can do the Silverton, you know, from Durango to Silverton, Colorado. So you should really try the one from Santa Fe to Lamy, and take the night one. That way you get to do the stars and all that fun stuff.
The margarita train.
The
No,
margarita.
no, better not.
Right.
But before we slag streaming services too much, I should point out that my own Logan series was picked up by Amazon and
Really?
Safe House Pictures.
You're
I'll
enigmologist?
have your, I'm sorry?
You're enigmologist?
Yes. And they've attached a bunch of writers to it, and
That's wonderful
it-
news.
they're hard to enjoy.
Your last one was so fabulous that I've really been in mourning ever since. They haven't written another one.
Well, I'm spending my time on Pendergast and Nora, but the thing is about as far as Jeremy Logan goes, I feel that the next book of his, if there ever is one, it has to be the scariest book ever written. You know, he's a Ghostbuster, and he has yet to bust a really ghost wimpy. And you know, I promised myself if he ever reappears, it'll be my magnum opus. So we
It
shall
sounds
see.
wonderful. Poor Lincoln, the last one that he wrote, we so underestimated how copies we would sell that a semi drove up to Lincoln's home in Florida and deposited. Like, yeah, I mean, I still feel guilty about that. I don't know how you ever dealt with that. I mean, you're talking about having to unload a truck and take all those books inside and sign them and send them back. I felt guilty for ages.
Yeah, it moved very gingerly into the palm tree to get into my house.
It really did. I know. It's a wonderful series. If you haven't read Lincoln's standalone books about, what's his name again?
Jeremy Logan.
Thank you. If you haven't read the Jeremy Logan books, I really recommend them. They are truly wonderful. Anybody else have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. We totally overrode you.
I didn't want Doug to escape without telling us about his next book that he's doing with his daughter. I was really intrigued by that.
Oh, you want to talk about Paradox, which will be the sequel to Extinction. Right.
Yeah, yeah. That you know, my daughter always wanted to be a writer, and she's been writing novels ever since she was like 9. And but you know, she being a realistic person, knowing that the writing life is not maybe the most. You know, she went to law school and she graduated and she passed the bar in California and got a very good job. First, she was a prosecutor, and then she didn't really like that so much, so then she went into private practice. But she just couldn't stopped thinking about writing. And so at a certain point, she called me up and said, "Dad, I want to take 6 months off to write a novel. Will you support me?" And I said, "No, no, are you kidding?" And but then I had this idea that my publisher, who published Extinction, was a huge success, wanted a sequel, and I was busy writing books with Lincoln. So I said, "Well, why don't we team up and write this sequel together?" So she did most of the work, and she came up with all these great ideas, this fresh, youthful energy and characters and ideas and everything. So, it's a really good book, I think. It's called Paradox, and it'll be published in April of 26.
You can be right here.
Yeah, it's.
What do you think, Lincoln? Are you going to deny the idea that you ghost wrote?
No, it's funny. I was tweaking Lincoln, saying, "Well, let's see, what should we call ourselves? How about Preston and Child?" Lincoln didn't think that was very funny.
No.
I have no side piece. It's all I'm what you see right here.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
I'm rereading your travelogue books from 30-something odd years ago, and follow Coronado's trail from the Mexican border all the way to
Cities of Gold, one of my favorite books ever.
and then the other one going around the Navajo Reservation.
Talking to the ground.
Yes, they're magnificent. Travel has made me interested in going those areas, but I've traveled through that area, and it's god awful country, and I just wonder how you survived it. One of them described that you burned your lips so bad that you couldn't eat.
Oh, yes.
Trying to find water.
Oh, it was very challenging. Yeah, it was very challenging. It's really tough country. Southern Arizona with that, teddy bear choya or jumping choya and the cat claw and the mesquite is really tough. But I'm working now on another nonfiction book, which is about Arizona, and it's about an incident. How many of you are familiar with the Pleasant Valley War? Do you know about that? Well, it's mostly forgotten, but it was an incredibly violent episode in Arizona pioneer history in the 1880s, where over 30 people were killed or murdered or hung or or disappeared, and so I'm writing about that. It's a true story. It's an actual. This is real history, and it's really fascinating. It's incredibly interesting.
Doug promises that he will do an event here with slides, with photographs, so we can all really participate in that. I think it'll be great. Even Patrick, who knows more about Arizona history than anyone else I know, is not that familiar with it.
No, I mean, I knew a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's really a story that encompasses in microcosm many very important, large currents in Western history, and the foundations of many of our national stories or national myths come from this incident.
Patrick, do you have questions from the audience?
Question from the audience.
Do you need a microphone?
Yeah.
Here, do you want to borrow mine there?
Sure. Yeah, so the question from the audience online, Elizabeth says, not to get too political, but I have difficulty picturing Corrie or Pendergast thriving in the FBI during today. I wouldn't be surprised if they both quit and formed a private consulting agency. What do you think?
I think if we answer that question, we'll lose half our readers.
We don't know which half, though.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I have one more. Since New Mexico has been a topic tonight, I flew over from Albuquerque to see this event today.
Well, thank you. That's great.
The second one, I was here for Michael Connolly last year as well, so I enjoyed this very much. I do a lot of reading of books from the library. Given my age, I like large print copies from the library. I was curious how long it takes for a book to get into, how long before you release a hardcover book so libraries can get them around the country? Obviously, it doesn't happen right away because you take away from the
No, sir. It actually, they come out at the same time.
They do.
Yeah, they absolutely do. It depends upon, libraries tend to buy books from distributors rather than individual. We buy books directly from the publisher. So these books actually have been here for 6 weeks, I think, or more. But libraries generally have to go through an intermediate according to their budgets and so forth. And so the books are slower to arrive there. And then they often have very long waiting lists, where readers have signed up. The large print edition of Badlands is here. I mean, sometimes the large print editions are slower to appear, but we actually have the large print of Badlands here in the store. But in general, the library should have books as soon as their distributors get to them. There is no difference in the publication and the release time. Mm-hmm.
What's the process for paperback? Because the hard copy is so hard to hold.
I'm sorry, what was
The
the?
paperback, when do you switch
Well,
to
it's up to the publisher. It used to be that it was generally a year between the hardcover and the paperback. Now they have shortened it up very often to 6 months. And our current publishing model is that sometimes, like tomorrow night, we have the new Edgar winner called Kimberly Bell, who wrote a terrific book called The Paris Wife last year. Her new book, The Expat Affair, is a hardcover paperback at the same time. And we've had several authors here recently where both formats appear at the same time. So there's a constant sense of innovation going on about publishing. Your books come out, it's about a 6-month gap, isn't it, generally now?
Yes.
It's not a full year anymore. It's usually about 6 months before they release the... But, the truth is the price of the paperbacks are skyrocketing. And thanks to the tariffs, ABC actually interviewed me before Liberation Day or whatever bullshit they call it. And one of their questions was, was the tariffs really going to affect our business in publishing? And I said, well, here's the thing. You can't really onshore pulp paper publishing because we can't grow trees fast enough. We just can't do it. So, paper comes from Canada. There are no paper factories to speak of, and there are not enough forests here in the United States to provide paper. So the cost of books is just gonna go up, which means that the price of paperbacks and hardcovers is gonna go up. There's just nothing we can do about it. It's not as though we can suddenly regenerate a paper You live in Maine, and you know that the paper plants in Maine are largely defunct because it comes from Canada now.
That's right. Yeah, Maine, used to have paper mills, and there are no longer any paper mills in Maine. And
there also aren't the trees to support the paper mills if the paper mills were in effect.
That's right. Yeah, Canada's got these huge forests that I'd rather cut their trees than our trees.
Yeah, I mean, you can't onshore that stuff. So the point is that the cost is going to inevitably go up for both editions.
I'm thinking there's a lot of old books that people throw away. Are they recycled and made into paper again? I wonder.
Well, you mean is the paper recycled?
Yeah, because a lot of the libraries have to remove their books if they're too old. And a lot of people just...
Well, I think there's a very strong used book market, right? But I don't know that the paper itself is recycled. I mean, Scottsdale has a fairly active recycling program as compared to many cities, but I don't honestly know. Yes, sir.
I used to live in Oregon. Outside of Portland, there was one of the few paper pulp that were still left. And quite frankly, they got closed down because all of a sudden people started living there. If you ever lived near one of these, it smells really interesting.
Yeah, I remember growing up in Maine, when the wind was blowing from the paper mills, you were like, whoa, that is a really strong smell.
Driving up the canyon and I knew within 5 miles where it was.
It's really water intensive too, isn't it? Yeah.
The cleanup was expensive. They were on the river, so they had access to barging. But even then, it was done.
Yeah. I've driven one of those old main rivers there. Was it the Aroostook or something?
Oh, yeah.
Which used to be the site of a great deal of paper. Anyway, my point is that tariffs should be a little more thoughtful in that what realistically can we bring back and what realistically can we not, and paper is not one of those things we can bring back. Have you tried, digital books? I hesitate to say that, but I don't like to read them. I can't remember anything I read on a digital screen. It's just like, but for many people, it's a good idea. Right. Well, we digress. Anybody have a final? Yes, sir.
I've got a question for Link.
Okay.
Did he back in the day really tell Peter Capstick to go back and write a good book without trying to get eaten this time?
That's a great question.
Yes, I did.
You sound
And,
reluctant to admit
That's
that.
my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thanks for clarifying.
Right. Anyone else?
Peter Capstick was a great guy. I remember he took me to lunch at the Explorers Society in New York, and he was very proud to be a member, and that was quite a place. I also had lunch with Chuck Barris at the Friars Club, so I could probably write a book about the weird clubs in New York that authors have taken me to. But Death in the Long Grass, Capstick's first book, is a fantastic nonfiction read for anybody who likes stories about hunting in Africa. Peter Capstick, he left his job on Wall Street and went out and became what they called professional white hunters. I don't know if they're still called that or not, and he could spin and tail like you wouldn't believe. I was so jealous, and still am.
Anyone else? Well, in that case, thank you all very much for coming tonight.
Yes,
Let's give
thank
our
you,
authors
thank you.
a round of applause. Right. And somewhere, I'm trying to remember where it is, I have an advanced reading copy of a book to give away. I'll have to go find it. Patrick, did I leave 2 books, or maybe I left them in my car? But anyway, we'll do the lottery, and then I'll go find the book for you. It's called Cold Burn, and it's by two authors actually, but they write together as A.J. Landau, and it is book 2 in a national parks mystery set in Glacier Bay, and there is an Elon Musk character in it, which is all bad. But anyway, they have a brilliant job about Glacier Bay and the national parks. I missed their first book because it's often difficult to deal with 2 authors, unlike you two, who are fabulously, wonderfully easy to deal with. But it's going to be, they both signed our books. They're both here. And we're going to be doing a virtual event with them week after next. And it is our July crime book of the month. I think it's really important to think seriously about our national parks, which are under threat. We don't really want them privatized for the benefit of various people. And anyway, I love the book. I thought the writing was great. Have you run across them? Because they're part
I
of
did.
Thriller
In fact,
Fest.
I blurbed that book.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah.
forgot. Sorry.
Yep. It's a really good book.
I thought so.
Wrote somewhere on the cover. It'll tell you that I think it's a good book.
Wonderful. All right, so you can't go wrong. Doug and I both think it's a great book. We actually have some signed copies here right now, and I'm really looking forward to talking. So I have an advanced reading copy, which I am giving away. Patrick? 16. So if you will pick a number between 1 and 16, I think it's in the back seat of my car. I'll go get it for you.
1 and 16. How about 9?
Is that you? Okay.
Wow.
All right. Wonderful. I will go and get my copy of
Number
Cold Burn
9.
for you.
Number
Right.
9.
I urge you to buy it in the first book, the name of which I can't remember, because I do think it's really important. How many of you read Nevada Barr when she was publishing? Okay. So it's not exactly the same as Anna Pigeon, but I think it's wonderful for people to celebrate what I think is one of our greatest American achievements, which is our national park system. So I hope you will do that. Lincoln is going to leave us. Doug will stay here if you want to get your book signed. Lincoln has signed all of our books at home in person, and Doug has signed a lot of them today, but we may still have a few here in the store. He hasn't yet signed, but you can do that. So thank you very much for coming. Virtual audience, thank you very much.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Bye,
Thank you
Lincoln.
all. Thank you.
All right, let's just clear the table here so there's